Today we're going to be talking about one of the coolest accessories I found for sci-fi miniatures games. That's this, Sci-fi Skirmish Scenarios by John Lambshead. So stick around and find out why I like it. Hey, it's Grover with Old Ones with Dice. I really like sci-fi skirmish games. That's really my thing. And I've played with a lot of different rule sets, and some of them are a little bit lacking in terms of scenarios. I really like the immersion you can get with a skirmish game. Having only 5, 10, 15 models on a board, a relatively small board size that can be densely packed with terrain. And the last piece is really a reason why the fight is going on. What's going on? That story behind it. And that's something you can really do in skirmish games that kind of gets a little bit lacking with larger games. You can do it, but the time that it takes can be a little bit overwhelming. Now, one of the cool accessories I came across is this. This is Sci-fi Skirmish Scenarios. Now, it's just what it sounds like. It's a series of 36 scenarios in here. But more than that, John really talks about how to do world building, how to create an immersive environment for your games to take place in. And he also goes into how to do solo play, how to do campaigns. And there's a lot in here I really like. And we use these scenarios for playing games like Space Weirdos or Stargrave. So why don't we go down to the tabletop, let's flip through it and take a closer look. All right, let's take a look. So we have Sci-fi Skirmish Scenarios. This is by John Lambshead, as we said. And let's find the table of contents. So we're going to see from the table that we are organized into 4 parts. The background, which is going to be world building, the scenarios, solo scenarios, and how to do campaigns. Looking at the scenarios, you can see how he's numbered them. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and each of those numbers are divided by 6 again. This allows you to roll a d6, then roll a d6 again, and you're going to be able to come up with a random scenario out of this chart. So, going to that very first part, we have the background. This is going to be your world building. In here, he gives an example of a world that he's imagined. He's going back in time, all the way back to geological times, to explain why there's a certain resource available, how that resource is mined, how it's discovered, how there's a civilization that grows around that in terms of the mining consortiums, how there's an economic downturn, and a stratification of the society. In here, we're going to find the various different locations that he talks about. The green zone, which is your richest, most prosperous part of the society, which is kind of a walled-off compound, the way he describes it. Then you have your middle class living in condos, industrial zones, and then as you get farther out, things get worse. The barrens, ruins, and finally the badlands, people living out in the wilderness. This gives you your setting, and then you have your cast of characters, your corporate security, your police, your militias, local businesses, organized crime, street gangs, and cults. Religious cults are always fun to add into skirmish games. So you can give or take whatever you find here, but it gives you a really interesting thought process on how to go about doing that world building. And it's really an interesting read. Now, once you get into the scenarios, what you're going to find, they are organized, each one's organized the exact same way. So take a look at one of them. This one is one of the scenario 1.4. This is a pretty basic scenario with a little bit of a twist. So it's called the Bad Meat. Each one of these are organized, the same. So you have an introduction, which is describing the background of what's happening, the objectives, what kind of forces we are going to be looking at, the terrain, game length, which is usually the game length of the whatever rule set you're using. What are the winning conditions? There's going to be some special rules that apply only to that scenario. And what I really like is he gives designer notes for each one of the scenarios, kind of giving a little bit more insight to his thought process. Now, each one's also going to have a deployment map. So it's looking at this one, which is called the meetup. So this is a conflict between two street gangs. They're looking to make peace. The leaders meet in a neutral location with their respective gangs behind them. And that's what we're going to see in the deployment zone. Deployments, you're going to have terrain mixed up in here. We have a road going down the center where the two leaders are. Turn one, something's happened. Members of the gang have started shooting at you. Something's alerted them. So you're going to look back to special rules. The leaders are going to be out of position, turn one. They need to run back to their forces. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward, here we are, here they are, they're going to fight it out. Now, as soon as one of the opposing leaders is killed, it's an instant victory, which gives you kind of an interesting way to play. And he talks about that in the notes, that this scenario is all about aggression. If a player is losing the war of attrition, then they should consider a suicidal assault to take out the enemy leader and snatch victory from the gun barrel of defeat. Yeah, it sounds like an assassination win from War Machine. I've done that a few times. So this is a real basic scenario. Forces are evenly matched. Some of them are a little bit more, are going to be more interesting. We're going to take a look at this one. This is one I really like, which adds a random element to the objectives. This is called Manna from Heaven. Basic story that it's introducing is that a shuttlecraft has exploded in the atmosphere and its cargo is falling to the earth in the ruins. Rival street gangs, rival security forces, however you want to think of it, are struggling to grab that equipment, get it back to their territory. Everything's lined up. Once, board is divided, into two sections for deployment with the center point. Now, on turn one, you're going to roll D3. That's how many of these cargo pods are going to be dropped from the sky. They will be scattering a random direction and 3d6 from that center point. Games I've played, we usually use a smaller 2x2 board, so we went with 2d6 from the center point. And now he's explaining all this in your objective. You're trying to get these, these various points, these various cargo blocks. The forces are going to be equal, set up 4 inches from the board edge. Scenario set up in the ruins. Now we have special game length rules here. So it's kind of a variable end. Every turn you're starting at a certain point, you're going to be rolling to see if the cargo pods stop falling from the sky. Once they stop falling, you have 2 more turns to collect your stuff. At the end, divvy up who collected the most cargo pods, and that's who won the game. So special rules which are going to be explaining how the drop pods are going to be distributed. What happens if someone gets wounded when they're carrying one? What happens if they get killed? I think when we did it, we also added a house rule. It slowed down your movement if you were carrying one of these pods. So this is kind of adds a random element to the objective. It's something I really like in scenarios. I really don't like having arbitrary point. This is an arbitrary point. If you have a model standing in this arbitrary point, you score that objective that turn. There should be some sort of reason, and this gives us some reasons, this framework that he's creating. So we'll go through quite a few scenarios here. Another one I like, which has a random element, is called the drone dance. This is scenario 3.6. And this is basically a corporate security drone prototype, has malfunction, and it's bouncing around in the ruins. It's got a pre-designated area that it's rotating in, and it's going to bounce around. And the two forces are both fighting against each other, and they're trying to catch this drone and get it back to their deployment zone. His special rules are going to be giving you the rules for how the drone is moving, how the game wins. So this one actually keeps going until someone captures the drone or concedes the game. So he's got your special rules. Forces are equal in this one. So, it's going to say the forces are equal and set up in respective zones opposite of each other. Now, some of the scenarios go in asymmetrical. Like this one, this is called rear guard. This one's 4.3. Now here, you're going to have one force that's going to have more numbers than the other. So in this case, the red force is the stronger, they're aggressor models, and the blue are going to be kind of defenders. In this case, they're trying to get off the board. Blue will set up in the middle of the game. They're trying to get off the board. Red are trying to kill them or cut them off from this exit. And there's points. Blue gets points for getting off the board. Red gets points for killing the blue. So you have to kind of balance that. Do they all run off at once, leaving a couple behind? Or do they kind of take out some of the red? You know, this is where the tactics come in and the dilemmas in the game come around. He really does give, he kind of goes through this in the notes again. So this is kind of an overview of some of the different scenarios. And again, there's 36 of them. And I'll be honest, I haven't even read through every single one of these. And it's going to take me a while to actually play through all these scenarios. Now, separate from that, in the middle of the book, you're going to find these color plates, a variety of different manufacturers of miniatures. So some of these, this one actually he describes as actually Asgard miniatures from the 1970s. So that's pretty cool. He's got sources, nice paint jobs, kind of featured a few things. And at the back you'll see the two, let's see, these are Mantic game miniatures that are from the cover. Now once you go through the scenarios, it talks about the random scenario generator. It is what it is. You know, you're going to pick out what kind of forces, how long the game, the map deployment zones. One interesting thing in here you could add to other games, other scenarios, is the random events, which I always find is kind of adds a little bit of spice to those scenarios. If random ruffians, random monsters, random natural events take place. Smog, here we go, sandstorms, things that are going to affect your line of sight. So keep that in mind. That's something that can add a lot of flavor to those scenarios. He does get in a little bit about how to do solo play. I won't go into that too much. A lot of games do now include, you know, elements of how to play the game solo. And he kind of goes through and kind of gives you kind of an idea how to go and control enemy forces, how to progress your narrative. So part 4, what we're looking at are campaigns. Now, he has 3 different campaigns outlined here. And there's kind of a narrative tree that he establishes in terms of play this scenario first. That narratively leads into this next scenario. Depending on who wins or loses that scenario, you're going to go to either this third one or the fourth battle. One of these 2 scenarios. After that, again, you're going back into this final showdown and then the escape. And so he's following from one scenario, leads to the next one, will lead to the next one, leads to this last one. And then he's linked that they have this kind of narrative link to them. And he gives you 3 examples of how to do this. And from that, once you have a little more familiarity with scenarios, you'll start to see where one scenario would easily lead into the next one. So I really like this part. I really like these skirmish games where you can create a narrative, where it's not just one game. You can play one to 2 hour game. The next week, maybe you do the next one. You know, you can do this over a period of time. This is a lot harder to do with big games to keep everything balanced. With the smaller games, it's a little bit easier to keep everything balanced together. But so far, I really like what I'm seeing in this book. And now the very last part, which is the appendix, he's going to talk about where you find stuff to play games. Now he's going to talk about models and some of the manufacturers for 25, 28 millimeter games, 15 millimeter sci-fi stuff, which is something I really never looked into, but it might be an interesting option. And then finally talks about what kind of games. He's going to talk about games that are going to have models associated with them. So Necromunda, Infinity by Corvus Belli. These are games that actually have a miniatures line. And then you have miniature agnostic games. He calls generic rules. Black Ops, Gaslands, which is something that really caught my eye when he had Gaslands listed here, because my thought, I have this idea of little soldiers. Why not have post-apocalyptic vehicles be the ones that are moving around on the terrain? they're the ones with those movement modifiers that are trying to scurry between terrain. And I think that would be a really interesting game to play some of these scenarios out in a Gaslands game. So anyway, I hope this gives you an idea what this book's like and how useful it can be. So you've made it this far into the video. If you like the content that I'm producing, please hit like, hit subscribe, leave me a comment. Now, I've put an affiliates link for this product in the comments. It's through Amazon. It doesn't cost you anything. It does help the channel a little bit. So until next time, this has been Grover with Old Ones with Dice.